birthday on April Fool's Day. That would be kind of a weird thing, because besides all the pranks that people do, you have a birthday. So, all right. And then, happy birthday to Paul and Ann. I share the birthday with Ann to be Cole. So, happy birthday. I'll be 56. I don't know how old Ann will be, and I shouldn't announce it anyway. So,
I think she'll be 29.
29? Okay. So she's going to be 29. Not 39 like some people. All right. And continue to pray for Sister Flora as her new walk with God. And then also pray for the upcoming rallies that I think Brother Nathan called me. And we discussed it. I don't think the Lexington Youth Rally will be on. So I can't speak for the North Platte Men's Rally, but I do know that more than likely the Lexington Youth Rally will not be. And so please pray for Nathan. He's going to get a hold of me today to verify whether they decided to have it or not have it. So please pray for him. But we were leaning to not having it. And that's too close to when they supposedly lift the quarantine. So, all right. Anything else, Terry?
Brad is giving a bittersweet praise. Bittersweet because Kendall and Melissa got their house, but it's in Ainsworth. So they're closing on their house, I think he said on April 10th. So
April 10th. Okay. All right. Anything else? I know next week someone has a birthday coming up. Couple people. All right. Okay. We're going to be talking this morning. If I don't spill everything here. Yeah. Okay. As I was making the sermon this morning, and I was thinking of some thoughts, and I always gather up my thoughts during the week, and then I try to do it more current event style. In other words, what's going on, and to deal with the problems or the praises of what's going on. And then also, I just want to have you guys understand a few things that that there probably is a lot of anxiety. There's probably a lot of nervousness. There's so many things that are going on right now. And as Terry and I have been talking about how, besides the health problems, we're having economy problems, economic problems, but not only here in Hastings, but all over the world. It's not just here. And, we have all kinds of things that are happening that messing people up mentally, emotionally, financially. People are wondering about their jobs and their future and such like that. And so that is a common thing. That is something that we all should understand, that is normal. That is normal for us to be not worried, but concerned, okay? So let's take a look at 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 6. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 6, and I want to steer you to this text because it's one that's very good, and a lot of times that we read it, but when it really, really counts, of course, is when things are in need, okay? So 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 6 and 7, and it says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." So one of the things that we want to do, of course, is number one is we need to humble ourselves. A lot of times when things are going good, we try to act like we're self-made men, self-made women. We are where we're at because we got there. We had strong work and we did this and we are there. Okay? Well, Apostle Peter reminds us, first of all, we need to humble ourselves. All right? So we go down to the very bottom And I like to think of how you'll see these pictures of these people and they're all the way to the ground in prayer. Sometimes they're kneeling, but sometimes they're just with their face into the ground. They're kneeling, but with their face to the ground. And I wonder if that's one of the things that we need to do to approach God, is to make sure that we're telling God that it's anything that we've had before and will have in the future is because of him. Humble yourself, and then he's going to lift us up. It's kind of interesting because a lot of times we have a ceiling of ourselves, like where we are, how high we can go. If we turn it over to God, we'll probably be able to do things that are even beyond what we can expect to do. So I just think of that, how if we humble ourselves, God will lift us up in the due time. All right, verse 7 says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. So he's not a God that doesn't care. He's a God that cares for you. Every time you have a problem that you're worried about, and you get up in the morning, and I don't even turn on the news anymore. There's so much negative out there. But you hear all this stuff, people talking and stuff like that. And you can concentrate on all that, and it'll just bring you down. So what you have to do, of course, is you got to cast what's bothering you on God, because he does want to listen to you. He cares for you. So as we look through this lesson that I'm going to bring this morning, that's the first thing, is that God cares for us during this whole thing. Now, this other thing is we know that God knows that we do get troubled. We always say be strong and courageous. But courage doesn't mean that you're not afraid. It means you're acting upon whatever the situation is. You've got the power of God, but you know yourself that you can't do it, but you go ahead and trust in God. So let's look at John chapter 14. In John 14, we have Jesus, and he's talking to the apostles as he's telling them that he's going to leave, and he tells them, don't worry about it. Now, can you imagine these apostles, as they were with him for 3 years, to develop a very close relationship with Jesus, and they had thought that he was going to build a physical kingdom here on earth, and he was going to be the king. And they didn't quite understand. He kept telling them that he wasn't going to, and they still thought he was. And then finally he drops it on them that, hey, I'm going to be crucified, or I'm going to die and raise again. So he tells them, don't be troubled. Now that's got to be troubling, because we know that after Jesus died, it says that they went back to their stuff. They started going fishing and all that, just like they were before. He had to kind of gather them all up, say, hey, we've got a job to do. So in those 50 days between crucifixion and the start of the church, he had to gather them up, tell them, we got things to do, and I expect you to do them. So John 14:1, he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. So he tells them, number one, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in me. That's what we have to do, of course. We need to trust in God. Now, trust in him for what? Trust in him right now, while we're during this time, but also that we're going to have a future in eternity. A sad thing the other day, as somebody was talking or saying stuff, and ultimately at the very end he says, my destiny is going to be hell. I thought, wow, what a life is that? I don't know how old this person's going to live, but if a person lives, as the Bible says, to 70, that's what a normal person will live to. If they're strong, they live to 80 and then beyond. But then after that, hell, I don't want to look to that. There's no future. I don't care what you do here on earth. If that's your destiny, what a terrible way to look at things. That's why Jesus said in John 14:2, in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. So Jesus says, you know what? I'm going to build you something. I've got some great plans for you. So number one, he was going to take care of them. Number two, for eternity, he's got things all handled. He's got it. So we need to remember that. So we go into this next part. So the first part, of course, is encouraging us to know that God is a God that cares for the things we go through, to cast our anxiety on him, and that not to let our hearts be troubled. The second part I want you to think about is reality. Reality is, a lot of times people think that when we become Christians, that God puts this magical thing that hovers over us and nothing will hurt us. And that's not the case. And you'll find out throughout the Bible, you find out that the righteous, those that serve God, doesn't matter whether it's a patriarchal period, the Old Testament period, or the Christian period as we live in today, that Christians do get sick. Christians do die. Christians do just like other people. And so how do we deal with that? And that's what I want to concentrate on this, is that we are human, just like everybody else. We're saved. We got a good future. We have a God that will help us through everything. But we do get sick. So in the Bible, we know that there were many people that were righteous that got sick. Okay? So it doesn't mean that just because we're Christians, we may not get the coronavirus. So that's unfortunate. People would think, well, you need to be able to say that. No, unfortunately, maybe one of us or some of us may get it. But we need to be careful and not be worried about it. And be concerned, but under control. For instance, if you're going to cross the street, what do? You don't fret and say, well, I might get run over by a car or a truck or whatever. We take the proper precautions, and then we cross the street. So we look both ways, and we make sure we judge the amount of distance the car or truck, whatever it is coming down the road, is before we proceed across the road. So, and that's the same thing we need to understand with the coronavirus, is that we can't just say, well, we're Christians, we're exempt. So we're just going to live our life like normal, and we're not going to be sick at all. That's not the case. So we want to understand that. So I want to go to one of the examples there, and found in 2 Kings chapter 20 and verse 1. Now this is the story of King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah was one of the few that were godly. And it's unfortunately, when you read 1st and 2nd Kings, you find that it seems as though there'd be one good king and then 5 others that were bad. And then finally a new king would raise up that would be godly. But the evil kings always outnumbered the good kings. That's unfortunate. But 2 Kings chapter 20, beginning in verse 1, we find it says, in those days Hezekiah became ill, was at the point of death. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, went to him and said, this is what the Lord says. Put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover. Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord. Remember, O Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion, and have done what is good in your eyes. And Hezekiah wept bitterly. Before Isaiah had left the middle court, the word of the Lord came to him. Go back and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, this is what the Lord, the God of your father, says. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will heal you. On the third day from now, you will go up to the temple of the Lord. I will add 15 years to your life, and I'll deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. So here we have the story, King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah was a godly man, and he became ill, and he was about to die. Now, just think about that. If thought all the righteous would be all healed and stuff like that, or maybe never get sick, well, he got sick. But we also see some things that happen here. Number one, we find that he humbled himself. He humbled himself. It says that he fell. He turned his face to the wall and he cried and wept bitterly for mercy. As Isaiah was leaving, he wasn't even very far, and God says, turn around. That was fast. I don't know how far he was, but he just turned around, comes back. He says, God has heard you. Now, what did he tell Hezekiah before? He says, put your house in order. And that's one thing that all of us, it doesn't matter if we're sick or not, our house should be in order. So if anything would happen, we're ready to be with God. And your family would be ready to go on without you. That's a hard thing to think about. You realize that? A lot of times, like for instance, when Terry and I, when we got married, to death, separates us. Well, we don't expect that till we get old. Something might happen. And if it would happen, would it rock your world so much that you fall away if you're the one that lives? Or if she lives and I die, will it rock her world so that she falls away? Or will she remain faithful? So every one of us need to make sure that we put our house in order, because if you're a Christian, doesn't mean you're not going to get sick or something terrible might happen, but your house needs to be in order. It needs to be in order. Several years ago, in 1987, I was 22 years old, almost 23, about the exact same time. Right now in March, and this was back then, I got strep throat, staph pneumonia, and the doctor told me that I was going to die. 33 years later, I am still alive. You see, God gave me the exact thing that King Hezekiah did, except I've been twice as long living. That doesn't mean I'm going to live a lot longer than that, but I sure thank God for answering my prayer and those that prayed for me during that time. So we just think about that, is that, you could say, well, you know what? You shouldn't have ever got sick. Well, it also showed the power of God, because when I did get sick, I was healed. So it could be either way. And so a lot of times people say, if you're a Christian, you never get sick. That's not the case. We get sick also. I'm going to look at another one. Actually, I'm going to skip through that one, but I'll tell you that one is Daniel 8, and Daniel became very ill. Daniel 8, 19 through 27. You want to look at that. But the one that I want to focus on is found in Acts chapter 9. Acts chapter 9, we find, and it's kind of crazy because there's some other examples that I have, but I really want to focus on this one. Acts chapter 9 and verse 36. Verse 36 says, in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, which when translated is Dorcas, who was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please come at once. Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called the believers and the widows and presented her to them alive. Okay, so here we have Tabitha, or Dorcas, and here she is. She's doing great, doing awesome things for the other Christians, and she passes away. So then when Peter gets there, they start showing all the great things that she had done for them. It was a testimony. It was a testimony of how she was while she was alive. Now, how am I going to apply this? Okay, first of all, we find out that Tabitha got sick. She was a godly woman. She had great works. She was godly, and she influenced so many people's lives. When she died, there was going to be a big void in the brotherhood or in the church, and they wanted her to live, and God spared her. She resurrected. Now, I want you to understand here is that these people went to Peter and showed Peter all the great things she had done. I've done a lot of funerals, and I've talked to a lot of people before the funeral and try to gather up some thoughts about the individual. And what happens is a lot of times they will tell you things that you never knew before. And I think that's unfortunate, because what I want you guys to think about, even as the Christians brought out all these great things that Tabitha had done, is I believe that during this time, of course, during the time of illness, during the time of death, while people are alive, whether they're sick or not, you need to tell them you appreciate them. You see, Tabitha never heard that. Tabitha, then she resurrects and starts doing the things again, but here they're just saying, wow, look at this, how great she is. And I've done so many sermons or funerals that I don't know if that person even felt like they were appreciated. So I say, well, do you appreciate all your fellow brothers and sisters in the Lord? Do you appreciate your family, your husband, your wife? Do you appreciate your children? Do you appreciate them, and do you tell them? You know, a lot of times, we can tell them when they're doing wrong, but what about when they're doing right? What about the things that you like about them? Do you ever tell them that? You see, because we look in the New Testament, and Apostle Paul was the number one person that did that. When you look at the person that I always think about, and that's Barnabas, it says he's the son of encouragement. Now, he was a guy that if you needed something, he'd go and make sure that you got what you needed. But Apostle Paul is also a person of encouragement. So we're going to look up some scriptures real quick here. 2 Timothy chapter 1. 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 3. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 3, it says, I thank God. Who's he talking? He's talking to Timothy. Timothy's a young, aspiring preacher. And he says, I thank God, whom I serve, as my forefathers did, with a clear conscience. As night and day, I constantly remember you in my prayers. So first of all, he tells them, I remember you in my prayers. And you know what? That's one of the best things that I like to hear is when they say, I've been praying for you. It says, recalling your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. So he tells them, I remember you in my prayers, and I love to see you. When I see you, I am filled with joy. Verse 5, I have been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded now lives in you also. You notice what he does here? He talks about that he prays for him. He talks about the joy that he gets from being around him. And then the third thing he says, you have excellent faith. And then he says, it was passed on. You had a grandmother that was awesome with faith. You had a mom that was great with faith. And you also do that. You know, here he starts the second book of Timothy like that. Don't you think that after that, Timothy's heart would be receptive to anything he says? A lot of times people try to push things on someone else, and they never show them love, appreciation, respect, and then they expect to be listened to. You see, Apostle Paul, he went ahead and he told them, I appreciate you. Now, he didn't stop there. He went on to the church in Philippi. Let's take a look there. Philippians chapter 1 and verse 3. Philippians chapter 1 and verse 3. It says, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. You notice all these things that Apostle Paul says in these 3 verses. He says, first of all, he says, I thank God for you. Hopefully you're saying that kind of stuff to others instead of, oh, you're such a bother. You're just this. Oh, I wish you weren't around or whatever. You know, terrible things people will say. Apostle Paul says, I thank God every time I remember you. Every time I think about you. And then he says, in my prayers, I always pray with joy. You know, you just, when you're praying and you're praying for people, you pray, like what I do is I go down around and think of the pews where people sit and pray for each family. And it says, you pray with joy. You know, I think about right now where we don't have the fellowship. Okay, we're online and stuff like that. But the fellowship, I long to see the people back again. I long for that. And so it says also that he's confident that what started in him or them was going to carry on to completion. You know what? Have you ever told anybody, I really appreciate you as a Christian, and I know you're going to make it to the end? A lot of times we just say, well, you know, I hope you make it. You notice he said it with confidence. He says, I am confident of this, that the work that started in you will be carried on to completion. You know, anytime a person is giving that positive feedback, it makes the person excel. And so many times that is lost. So in closing today, I want you to think about that. Tabitha died. She was resurrected. People were telling all kinds of great things, But do you think she heard that? You know, I've done a lot of funerals that I never knew about whoever I'm saying the sermon about. Some of the things that they did because nobody talked about it. Nobody said how great of this they were or whatever. And I think, you know what? We need to do more. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We do know that God will be with us. And if we can go ahead and make people more excited about themselves, realize that they are special people, imagine how far they're going to go. And in closing, I want to tell you the story of my Aunt Emma, because my Aunt Emma was dying of cancer in Los Angeles. Terry and I were living there in Phoenix, Arizona at the time. I was out preaching there, and so we would travel back and forth from Phoenix to LA to visit her as she was dying there in Los Angeles. One of the things that I remember from doing that is that she would always encourage us. We were there to encourage her. She was in pain. Her body was filled with cancer and she was dying. And yet, when we went there, we were the ones that were encouraged. Because of that, well, of course, we named Brittany just before that, but she was already dying of cancer. And these were her final time. When we took her, she was just a little girl, and we took her to visit Auntie Emma. And we named her Brittany Emma Nicole. Emma as in my aunt. To always remember the beautiful soul that she had. And I often think about that is, can we do that? If we're the ones that's suffering, if we're the ones in pain, can we encourage others? Need that kind of strength. Let us turn on our hymn books. Number 380. Number 380 is Just a Closer Walk with Thee. So I'm going to sing all three verses, then I'd like to ask Brother Gary to dismiss us in prayer. Let's stand as you sing this one. 380. I am weak and thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long. As I walk, let me walk close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of twilight, if I falter, Lord, you care. With me, my burden shares. None but me, dear Lord, none but me. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my people life is gone, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely home, to thy kingdom shore, to thy shore. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be.
Father in heaven, I'm thankful that you've given us another day of life. Thank you for all those blessings that we enjoy. and help us to focus on the positive things in life that we have and not focus on those things that we have lost or that we feel like we've lost. Pray that you would be with us as we go through this week ahead, that you would give us strength and courage and faith and trust in you, to lean on you for every need that we have. Thankful for the encouragement that we've received by being here this morning. And I pray that you would bless each one who has made the effort to be here, and those who have listened to the message through the means that is available to them, and that you would bless each one, that they would be encouraged and strengthened in their walk with you. Be with us now and watch over us as we go from here. Keep us in your care and help us to serve you in this coming week. I pray in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Go by Uncle Paul and say hi. Right over there.
Step up there.
Right there.
Hi.
Step up on the thing.
There you are.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. Say hi.
Hi, everybody.
We miss you, huh? You miss everybody? Yeah. Guys can go now, it's off. Unless you want to stay right there.